everyone, my name is Gerhard Linde. I'm the Director at Tax and Compliance, and today we're just having a discussion with Jashwin. He's the Legal Manager at Tax Consulting SA, and we are just going to have a look at your tax debt in terms of your owe SARS money and what your options in terms of one is going to be either your dispute resolution if you don't agree with your debt, or if you agree with your debt and there's nothing else you can do, but we have to repay SARS, then there's some tax debt negotiations that needs to happen. So thank you, Jashwin, for joining us. You could just give us a bit of overview of what you do at Tax Consulting SA and what is your portfolio.
Yeah, thank you, Gerhard, for having me. So yes, I'm the legal manager for Africa Tax and Compliance here at Tax Consulting South Africa. And what I do is engaging SARS very much on a formal basis on behalf of the taxpayer, either in the form of the dispute process, which is your request for reasons, objection, appeal, and if necessary, proceeding to ADR, or alternatively, to engage with SARS to get the taxpayer the best value in terms of a tax saving, either in the form of a compromise or a deferral of payment. And then on the Africa side, we also do operate in terms of multiple functions for larger corporates and commercials, setting up companies, structuring payroll, etc., throughout Africa, the Middle East, and the larger part of Europe.
All right. Sounds very, very interesting. For today, we're just going to look at if we come to a place, if you are one of the people who owe SARS money, then there's going to be either one or two decisions. It's going to be either you agree or you don't agree on the debt. And if you don't agree, then you have to follow the processes. And Jashwin, will you take us through, some of the processes if you don't agree with the debt? What do you need to do, start off, and then maybe just have an overview of the process that needs to be followed in terms of, coming to an agreement of what the actual debt should be, or if any debt.
Yeah, so with regards to that process, generally what happens is SARS would raise an assessment, all right? And I mean, let's say the assessment says you owe SARS 2 million and you're of the mindset, you know what, I only owe you 200,000. The first step would be to obviously engage SARS, because it could be something as simple as there was an error when the assessment was raised, or alternatively, SARS have something on their side that they deem has raised an additional liability, whereas the information may not be accurate. So the first step is to submit an application called a request for reasons to SARS. Off the back of this application, SARS will then provide you with their full reasons for this assessment being raised. And once those reasons are received, only then can you object, because that would provide you with your grounds of objection. So the notice of objection then follows suit. And this does become quite a lengthy document, with the grounds of objection being quite extensive. But it must also be borne in mind that you do have 3 years from date of assessment to actually file this objection. And in the event that you're late, you've obviously got to prove exceptional circumstances in your notice of objection itself. So the objection, the outcome of that is either an allowance, a disallowance, or a partial allowance. So the difference is the allowance, you're objecting to 1.8 million. If it's fully allowed, the entire 1.8 million will then be reversed off your assessment. In the event it's disallowed, there will be no adjustment made to your assessment. And in the event that it's partially allowed, so for example, if SARS would allow the aspect of a rental loss, but they disallow a further portion of that based on it not forming part of a UDZ, which is an urban development zone, then you would either accept that as a partial allowance, or you would proceed to the notice of appeal stage. So the appeal stage, the notice of appeal is actually then submitted to the tax board in the event where the amount in dispute is less than R1 million, or to the tax court in the event that the amount in dispute is more than R1 million. With your appeal, it works very similar to an appeal in the normal sense, in the legal sense, with the direct court route, whereby your appeal does have an election for ADR, which is alternative dispute resolution. In the event where SARS agrees to ADR, what then happens is you have a roundtable meeting with senior SARS officials to resolve the matter. But in the event where they don't agree with ADR, then it must proceed to either the tax board or tax court respectively. What we have noticed is that quite often a response does not fall within the timeframes from SARS's side. So what happens in that instance is a notice in terms of Rule 56 needs to be delivered to either the board of the tax court, depending on whom the application was directed at. However, what must be borne in mind is that in the event the tax board is the relevant body, the Rule 56 notice must still be escalated to the tax court, because that is then more a legal notice than a dispute resolution notice. So the board will be made aware of it, but it is ultimately becomes the decision of the tax court to then enforce from SARS's side that a response is delivered timeously. And that notice will provide you with 15 days within which to receive a response from SARS before preparing the Rule 56 application and taking the matter on full steam as a litigious matter in the tax court.
Yeah, so just for people who might not know, the Rule 56 is just basically, keeping them accountable to their timeframes and giving them a notice that if they do not get back to you, or if they take their time, that this can enforce you to take the matter further and then ask the courts to grant, whatever your appeal or objection was on your terms. So it's a very interesting one to keep in mind. So all of this, it seems like your timeframes are quite important. So we might get people that are more than 3 years late, or for whatever reason they've not raised their objections or appeals in that time. Is there anything else that they can do? Let's say they are 3 years late. And I know we've been looking at your reduced assessments in terms of Section 93, but then obviously you are bound by finding some error or finding something else, wrong with your assessment or your returns, to maybe open up, something else in terms of your dispute resolution.
Yes, correct. So in the instance where, the time frame has lapsed, what happens is in the notice of objection, what is included would then be a request for condemnation in terms of condemnation of late filing. And in that instance, depending on the degree of lateness, you would need to obviously then justify either reasonable grounds for lateness, or in the event where your degree of lateness is to the extent where it's not reasonable, but for example, maybe something was audited 5 years down the line and that's when the error was picked up, or you signed a new accountant and that's when the error was picked up. In that instance, you then need to justify exceptional circumstances in your condemnation request, which will form part of your notice of objection.
All right. So looking at that, there's a couple of options available if you do not agree. But if we come to, if you agree with the debt, then obviously there's no room for you to go and ask them to reduce the debt in terms of objection appeals. There's another form of route that you need to take via the Tax Administration Act. It gives you provision to try or either repay your money, or you're going to do a compromise. So what we've been doing at Tax TDC is either, see, can you repay the money over a period of time? Repay the full amount that you owe them. For whatever reason it happened, maybe you just defaulted on a couple of VAT or pay-as-you-earn periods because of cash flow constraints, or like things like the lockdown that just happened, putting people out of business, maybe in terms of certain regulations that were passed that you could not operate as a business. So there's a couple of factors that comes into, why are you in debt in the first place? So you need to go into SARS and explain your circumstance. So the two options are either going to be a deferral, just to say I'm going to repay you this debt over 6 months or 12 months, or however long your cash flow can sustain it. Or if your business is in trouble or facing lockdown or close down, that you can enter into a settlement which is called a compromise. So therein you offer a settlement agreement to SARS on your debt, to see if you cannot come to an agreement, to see if this agreement is passed, that you can continue trading as well as paying your current taxes up to date. So within the time frame, there's a couple of options to consider. So whichever route you would like to take, it's good to have tax professionals on your side which can advise you in terms of which route you want to take. And to just plan your options going forward, and so instead of just maybe putting your head in the sand and leaving it, like we just heard from Jashwin, there's obviously a lot of time frames coupled to these things. So if you miss it, you miss some of your remediation things that are available to you. So so that's briefly covering the two topics of your tax debt. Jashwin, is there any closing thoughts from your side?
Yeah, look, Gerhard, I think what taxpayers need to obviously bear in mind. And previously the thought was, if you miss the deadline, you miss the deadline. You're either liable for whatever tax has been raised in terms of interest and penalties, or you're not eligible for the dispute process. Exceptional circumstances are needed, etc. But a very, very key point that needs to be borne in mind is that with the tax laws amendment bill that was quite recently passed, that it now focuses not only on intention of tax evasion or some sort of tax misdeed, but it also has a focus on negligence and being aware of your matters being in a non-compliant state and having a tax liability, but ignoring it and hoping it goes away. Because I mean, Gerhard, you know from years of practice that the previous stance was, you know what, I've got a small liability, but SARS, they maybe sent me one demand, I haven't heard from them in 3 years, I'm just going to leave it, it'll go away. But what the tax law amendment bill has done is it's now introduced the element of negligence. So for example, that would be construed as negligence in not getting your tax affairs in order when we're aware that you have non-compliance status. And I mean, even to the extent where if you're submitting a return and you mix up a figure, simple, very simple, human error, that as well can be construed as negligence, if you're aware of it, but in your mind, it's such an effort just to correct this figure, and it's only a few hundred rand or a few thousand rand, as the case may be. Those taxpayers could be facing serious penalties, including fines, but to the extent of up to 2 years of prison time. So, I mean, from a compliance perspective, this is not the time to bury your head in the sand. This is the time to move very proactively, because if SARS catches you before you come forward, you do have your options. You've got your dispute options, as you've mentioned, you've got your negotiation, compromise, deferral options. But ultimately, there is still that onus that will rest with the taxpayer to ensure that there's no negligence. And unless you're prepared to spend some good prison time in there, you do want to act quite proactively in actually resolving all of your issues as soon as possible and as amicably as possible with SARS.
Yeah, what we've come across a lot in our line of work is that people know what they do in their business because that's what they're good at. So they do a company or they do a sole proprietorship, and so there they go. But one thing that we all need to realize is that if you are in control of your finances and your companies, that you have the onus, on you to do your tax affairs or keep it up to date. Ignorance isn't an excuse, and the Act doesn't make provision for it. And that's where people might get it wrong sometimes. They just think, well, I don't have knowledge of it, so I don't have to, take care of it. So I'm going to employ someone to do it. But even if you do employ someone to take care of your tax affairs, it's just to keep abreast of those things, or like your simple things that you don't need to know, but you just need to know in detail. But what you do need to know is maybe the filing dates. If you are registered for VAT or pay-as-you-earn or provisional tax, that you file those things on the due dates that they are due at, and just to make sure that you keep abreast of those dates, at least, just to make sure that you know what's going on, instead of just claiming ignorance and giving total control to your compliance officer or tax consultant or accountant or auditor, whoever you employ, just to manage your affairs. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to be the one standing in front of that bill. You are going to be the one. So there are also measures that you can take. It's good to employ a professional, but like we said, many people have burned their fingers with professionals that they've trusted completely. So even though you trust someone, it's just to make sure that you yourself just check on those certain things. And that's why it's important to have someone in your corner that you can trust in the first place. So this is where we're coming from. Well, if there's any people on the channel looking for some advice, or in terms of Jashwin's mentioned dispute resolutions, if you don't agree with the debt, or if you want to make contact and see how you can solve debt, if you have it, please, there's a link below that you can follow. That will fill a form that you can fill in. That will be sent to us, and we can make contact with you. If you've got some other questions regarding tax matters, or anything that you've wondered about and you would like to see us covered, just pop it in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you will. There'll be more videos to come to give more insight and give more power to you in your hands, so that you can understand your tax matters and what matters to you, so that you can effectively manage your affairs and then your business at the end. So Jashwin, thank you very much for joining us today. It's very good to have your insights, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future to come.
Yeah, thanks, Gerhard.
All right, everyone, see you until next time.